The December wind cut through my coat like 1,000 tiny blades as I stood outside the small cafe in downtown Portland. Through the frosted window, I could see him, Marcus, sitting at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before. 10 years. 10 years since I'd last seen those hands, that face, those eyes that once promised me forever. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my colleague. "You got this, Emma. Remember who you are now." I took a breath. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clarifying. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, not from fear, but from something I couldn't quite name. Anger? Curiosity? Or perhaps just the ghost of the girl I used to be, the one who died on a June afternoon in front of 200 witnesses. The cafe door handle felt icy under my palm. I could still turn around. I could walk away, get back in my rental car, drive to the airport, fly back to Seattle, and pretend this email had never arrived. Pretend the past was truly buried. But I'd learned something over the past 10 years. Running from your past doesn't heal it. Sometimes you have to face the wreckage to understand how far you've traveled from it. I pushed open the door. The warmth of the cafe hit me, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and cinnamon. Marcus looked up, his face, older now, lined with worry and something that looked like premature aging, went pale. Actually pale. The color drained from his cheeks like water from a broken glass. "Emma," he whispered. I didn't respond. Not yet. I just stood there, letting him see me. The new me. The me he'd never known. The me who wore a tailored wool coat from a boutique in Capitol Hill, who had confidence in her posture, who looked at him with eyes that had learned to see clearly. His gaze traveled over me, not in the way men look at women they're attracted to, but the way someone examines a treasure they'd thrown away, only now realizing its value. "You came," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I said I would. I moved toward the table, each step deliberate. I keep my promises. The implication hung in the air between us. Unlike you, I didn't need to say it. We both heard it anyway. "Hello. My name is Emma Claire Richardson. I'm 35 years old. And I live in Seattle, Washington, where I work as a senior architect at one of the city's most respected design firms. I'm not the kind of person who likes talking about herself. I prefer to let my work speak for me. My colleagues describe me as focused, professional, someone who brings calm to chaos. I have a small apartment overlooking Puget Sound, a rescue dog named Pepper, and a life I built from nothing. But that's not who I was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was a different person entirely. I was 25, living in Portland, Oregon, working as a junior draftsperson at a small architectural firm, and planning a wedding that would turn out to be the most humiliating moment of my life. I wasn't always so guarded. I grew up in a loving home in Eugene, the younger of 2 daughters. My parents were middle class. Dad worked in insurance. Mom was a teacher. My older sister, Claire, yes, that's where my middle name comes from, was the golden child. Beautiful, confident, always knowing exactly what she wanted. I was the quiet one, the one who lived in sketchbooks and daydreams, drawing houses I'd never live in, designing lives I'd never have. "Emma's so shy," Mom would say, not unkindly. "She needs someone to bring her out of her shell." That phrase haunted my childhood. Bring her out of her shell. As if I was something broken that needed fixing. As if my quiet nature was a flaw rather than just who I was. Claire was loud, so Claire was right. I was soft-spoken, so I was wrong. I remember family dinners where Claire would dominate the conversation, talking about her job in marketing, her latest boyfriend, her plans to travel to Europe. Mom and Dad would listen, engaged, asking questions. When I'd try to share something, a new design I was working on, a class I was enjoying, the conversation would somehow drift back to Claire within minutes. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say. "Oh, Claire, tell your father about that promotion you mentioned. It wasn't cruel. They loved me. I knew they loved me. But love and attention aren't always the same thing, are they?" I learned to be the easy one, the one who didn't demand much, the one who smiled and nodded and made space for others to shine. I told myself this was kindness, generosity, selflessness. I didn't realize until much later that I was just making myself invisible. I met Marcus Chen when I was 23, fresh out of college, still trying to figure out who I was. He was 26, working in marketing for a tech startup, confident in ways I'd never been. He had this energy, this certainty about life that drew me in like gravity. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue on a warm August evening. I was standing alone by the grill, nursing a beer I didn't really want, watching groups of people laugh and connect in ways that seemed effortless. I'd always been terrible at parties, at small talk, at the performance of casual social interaction. Marcus walked up with that easy confidence some people are born with. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, smiling. I blushed, caught. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way." He extended his hand. His grip was warm, firm. "Marcus?" "Emma." "So, Emma, what do you do when you're not standing awkwardly at parties you don't want to attend?" I laughed despite myself. "I design buildings. Or I try to. I just graduated from architecture school." His eyes lit up. "Really? That's incredible. What kind of buildings?" And just like that, I fell. Not slowly, not carefully, but completely. Because Marcus made me feel seen. He asked about my drawings, listened to my ideas about sustainable architecture, encouraged me to dream bigger. He wanted to know what inspired me, what I feared, what I hoped to create. For the first time in my life, I felt like maybe I wasn't just the shy little sister, the background character in someone else's story. With Marcus, I felt like the protagonist. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in the Pearl District. He asked questions about my childhood, my family, my dreams. I talked more than I usually did, animated by his attention. "You're different than most people I meet," he said over tiramisu. "There's something genuine about you, like you haven't been corrupted by all the bullshit." I didn't know then that this quality he claimed to love, my yielding nature, my gentleness, would eventually become what he'd see as weakness. We dated for a year before he proposed. That year was a whirlwind. Marcus introduced me to his friends, brought me to work events, included me in his life in ways that made me feel valued. His parents, immigrants from Taiwan who'd built a successful restaurant business, welcomed me warmly. "She's lovely," his mother told him in Mandarin, not knowing I'd studied the language in college. "So sweet, so respectful." When Marcus proposed, it felt like a dream materializing. We'd driven to Cannon Beach for a weekend getaway. It was October, the off-season, so the beach was nearly empty. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Haystack Rock rose from the surf like something from a postcard. He got down on one knee in the sand, the waves providing a soundtrack. "Emma, you're the kindest person I've ever met. You make me want to be better. Will you marry me?" I cried. I said yes. I threw my arms around him, tasting salt water and joy and the promise of a future I'd been afraid to believe in. I called my parents from the hotel room, my hand shaking as I held up the ring to the phone camera. Mom cried. Dad's voice got thick with emotion. "My little girl's getting married," he said. Claire was the first person I called after my parents. "Oh my God, Em, let me see the ring." I showed her over video chat. She squealed appropriately, asked all the right questions, but there was something in her expression, something I couldn't quite read. Was it envy, concern, or just my imagination? "Are you sure he's the one?" she asked, her tone careful. "What? Yes, of course. Why would you ask that?" "No reason. I just want you to be happy. You deserve someone who sees how special you are." "Marcus does see that," I said, defensive. "Okay, good. Then I'm happy for you." But the question planted a seed of doubt I tried desperately to ignore. The engagement lasted another year. We planned everything together, the venue, the flowers, the music, or rather, Marcus planned and I agreed. He wanted a big wedding. Let's celebrate, he said. Let's show everyone what we have. I wanted something smaller, more intimate, maybe 30 people, just close friends and family, somewhere outdoors, maybe in the mountains. Simple and meaningful. That's not really a celebration, Em, Marcus said when I suggested it. We only do this once. Let's do it right. I just think, trust me on this, okay? Big weddings are memorable. They're what people talk about for years. I yielded. I always yielded with Marcus. That was the pattern of our relationship. He had strong opinions, I had gentle preferences, and love meant compromise, right? Except compromise suggests both people give something up. What I was doing was surrendering. But I told myself this was normal. This was how relationships worked. Someone had to lead, someone had to follow. And I'd always been a follower. The favoritism in my family intensified during the wedding planning. Claire, who'd been married 3 years earlier in a much smaller ceremony, suddenly had opinions about everything. You should definitely do roses, not peonies, she'd say. But I really love peonies, I'd respond. Roses are more classic, more elegant. Trust me, Em, I've done this before. Mom would nod in agreement. Claire does have excellent taste. When I'd shown them my wedding dress, a simple ivory gown with lace sleeves that I'd fallen in love with, Claire had pursed her lips. It's a bit plain, isn't it? I like simple, I said. Don't you want something more dramatic, more memorable? I want to feel like myself. Claire exchanged a look with Mom. That look I'd seen my whole life, the one that said, Emma's being difficult again. But I held firm on the dress. It was one of the few decisions I didn't let them override. 3 months before the wedding, the small cracks in my relationship with Marcus started to show. Or maybe they'd always been there, and I was just finally allowing myself to see them. We attended his colleague's birthday party at a trendy bar in downtown Portland. I was in the kitchen refilling drinks when I heard Marcus talking to his friend Jake in the hallway. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The kitchen door was open. Their voices carried. You sure about this? Jake asked. Marriage is a big step, man. I know, Marcus said. His voice sounded strange, tight, uncertain. Emma's great. She's sweet. She's supportive. She'll make a good wife. There was a pause. My hands froze on the wine bottle. But, Jake prompted. Another pause. Longer this time. But sometimes I wonder if I'm settling. If there's something more out there, someone more, I don't know, more exciting, more challenging? My heart stopped. The bottle slipped in my hands. I caught it before it fell, but the sound made them aware of my presence. They walked away, lowering their voices. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the wine bottle, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. She'll make a good wife. Not, I love her more than anything. Not, I can't imagine my life without her. Not, she's my best friend. Just, she'll make a good wife. Like I was a reliable appliance, a solid investment, something practical rather than passionate. I should have confronted him, should have marched into that hallway and demanded he explain what he meant. Should have asked if he actually loved me or just loved the idea of me, the quiet, agreeable girl who wouldn't challenge him, who'd make his life comfortable. But I didn't, because confrontation wasn't in my nature, because I was afraid of what he'd say if I pushed, because some part of me already knew the truth and wasn't ready to face it. Instead, I told myself it was nothing, just wedding jitters, normal anxiety. Everyone gets cold feet. We'd been together for 2 years. We loved each other. Everything would be fine once we were married. I became an expert at lying to myself. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of final preparations. Dress fittings, menu tastings, seating charts, rehearsal dinner planning. I threw myself into the details, hoping that perfecting the logistics would somehow perfect the relationship. Marcus worked late more often. He'd come home tired, distracted, scrolling through his phone with a furrowed brow. Everything okay? I'd ask. Yeah, just work stuff. Big project. He'd kiss my forehead absently and disappear into his home office. I'd lie in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I felt so lonely next to the man I was about to marry. Have you ever known something was wrong, but been too afraid to acknowledge it? Have you ever clung to a fiction because the truth was too terrifying? That was me, desperate and willfully blind. 2 weeks before the wedding, we had our final meeting with the venue coordinator. She went over the timeline: ceremony at 3 p.m., cocktail hour at 4 p.m., reception at 5 p.m., first dance at 7 p.m. "It's going to be perfect," she said, beaming. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, perfect." I reached for his hand under the table. He let me hold it, but his palm was cold and slightly damp. "You okay?" I whispered. "Fine," he said, not looking at me. That night, I dreamed I was standing at the altar in my wedding dress, but when I looked up, Marcus wasn't there. The altar was empty. All 200 guests were staring at me, waiting for something to happen. I tried to speak, to explain, but no sound came out. I woke up gasping, my heart racing. Marcus was asleep beside me, his back turned, his breathing even. I should have known then. My subconscious was trying to warn me, but I pushed the dream away, chalked it up to normal pre-wedding anxiety, and went back to sleep. The wedding was set for June 15th. A Saturday. Perfect weather. We'd rented a beautiful venue in the Pearl District, an old, renovated warehouse with exposed brick and soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in floods of natural light. 200 guests. My family, his family, friends, colleagues, people I barely knew but who'd been invited because Marcus's parents insisted. The guest list had been another battle I'd lost. I'd wanted intimate. Marcus, or rather Marcus's mother, wanted impressive. "We have obligations," Mrs. Chen had explained. "People from the community who would be offended not to be invited." "But we don't even know half these people," I'd protested weakly. Marcus had put his hand on my shoulder. "Let's just make everyone happy, Em. It's easier that way." Easier for whom, I'd wondered, but I didn't ask. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. Mom had insisted on the tradition. Bride stays with her family the night before. The room looked exactly as it had when I'd left for college. Pale blue walls, white furniture, posters of buildings I'd admired as a teenager. The Guggenheim, Falling Water, the Sydney Opera House. I lay there watching the early light filter through the curtains, creating patterns on the ceiling I'd memorized in childhood. And for just a moment, one crystalline moment, I felt absolutely nothing. Not joy, not excitement, not anticipation, just a strange, hollow quiet, like the eye of a hurricane. I should have listened to that silence, should have recognized it as my intuition screaming at me in the only language it had left. But I dismissed it as nerves and got out of bed. "Emma!" Claire burst into the room without knocking, already in her bridesmaid dress, a soft lavender that looked stunning against her dark hair. "Up! We have so much to do. Hair and makeup start in an hour." The day became a whirlwind, a tornado of activity that swept me along without giving me time to think. Hair and makeup artists transforming my face into something camera-ready. Mom crying while helping me into my dress. Bridesmaids taking photos. The photographer capturing candid moments that were all carefully posed. Everyone kept telling me how beautiful I looked, how lucky I was, how perfect everything was. But I kept thinking about what Marcus had said. "She'll make a good wife." Not "I love her." Not "she's my soulmate." Just "she'll make a good wife." "You okay, Em?" Claire asked at one point, catching me staring at my reflection with a blank expression. "Just nervous," I lied. She hugged me, careful not to wrinkle my dress. "It's normal to be nervous, but Marcus loves you. You're going to be so happy." Did he love me? Or did he love how easy I was? How I never challenged him, never demanded anything, never made waves? Was I a person to him, or just a pleasant accessory to the life he was building? But there was no time to spiral into these thoughts. It was 2:30 p.m. The wedding started at 3 p.m. We needed to get to the venue. The drive there was surreal. I sat in the back of a rented town car with Dad, my dress pooling around me like sea foam, my bouquet, white peonies because I'd insisted on that one thing, clutched in my hands. Dad kept looking at me with this expression of pride mixed with something that looked almost like concern. "You know you don't have to do this if you're not ready," he said quietly. My head snapped toward him. "What?" "I just mean, if you're having doubts, if something doesn't feel right, you can always wait, or change your mind. It's okay." "Dad, I'm fine. I'm just nervous." "Okay?" He patted my hand. "I just want you to be happy, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted." Those words would haunt me later. The permission I hadn't taken when it was offered. At 3:00, we arrived at the venue. It looked exactly as I'd imagined. The exposed brick glowed in the afternoon light. White roses and eucalyptus adorned every surface. The string quartet played softly, Pachelbel's canon, because tradition demanded it even though I'd wanted something different. Guests were already seated. Rows and rows of chairs facing a makeshift altar decorated with flowers and gauzy white fabric. 200 faces I'd have to look at after whatever was about to happen. I stood in the back room with Dad and my bridesmaids. Through a crack in the door, I could see the venue filling up. Marcus's large extended family on one side, my smaller family on the other. The visual imbalance felt metaphorical. Claire adjusted my veil for the 100th time. "You look like a princess," she said, but I didn't feel like a princess. I felt like a sacrifice. The music changed. The processional. Wagner. Bridal chorus. Here Comes the Bride. The song that had been used in weddings for over a century, carrying the weight of all those promises, all those hopes, all those futures stretching out like roads not yet traveled. Claire lined up to walk down the aisle first. She turned back and gave me a thumbs up. Then the doors opened and she began her walk. One by one, the bridesmaids proceeded, each step bringing me closer to the moment I'd been simultaneously anticipating and dreading. Then it was my turn. Dad offered his arm. "You ready, sweetheart?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. My mouth was dry. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. My hands were shaking, making the peonies tremble. The doors opened wide. 200 faces turned toward me. The string quartet swelled, and at the end of that long aisle, standing next to his best man, I saw Marcus. He looked handsome in his dark suit, his hair perfectly styled, but his face was wrong, too pale, too rigid. His eyes were wide, his jaw clenched. He looked like a man watching his own execution rather than his wedding. Our eyes met, and in that split second I knew with absolute certainty that this was a mistake, that he didn't want this, that I'd been lying to myself for months, maybe years. But what could I do? 200 people were watching. My father's arm was linked with mine. The music was playing. The ceremony had begun. So I walked. Dad and I walked down the aisle together, step by agonizing step. Each footfall felt like moving through quicksand. Time stretched and distorted. The walk couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. I passed Marcus's grandmother in the front row. She smiled at me, her eyes crinkling with joy. I passed my own grandmother, who dabbed at tears with a handkerchief. I passed colleagues from my firm, friends from college, people whose names I couldn't remember, but who'd come to witness this moment. We reached the altar. Dad kissed my cheek, his lips trembling slightly, and placed my hand in Marcus's. Then he stepped back and took his seat next to Mom, who was already crying into a tissue. Marcus's hand was ice cold and trembling, actually trembling. I stood facing him, the officiant between us. The string quartet faded into silence. The room held its breath. The officiant, a friend of Marcus's family, an older Chinese-American woman named Mrs. Liu, smiled warmly at both of us. She opened her leather-bound ceremony book. "Dearly beloved," she began, her voice carrying through the warehouse, "we are gathered here today to join Marcus Chen and Emma Richardson in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond, a promise made before family, friends, and God. It is not to be entered into lightly, but with careful consideration and deep love. But Marcus wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, over my shoulder, at the doors we'd just walked through, at the exit. His breathing had become rapid, shallow. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Marcus?" I whispered, trying to catch his eye. He didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on those doors. Mrs. Liu continued, oblivious. "Marriage is a journey of two souls choosing to walk together through all of life's seasons, through joy and sorrow, through abundance and want, through sickness and health." "Marcus," I said again, louder this time. He finally looked at me, really looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't love, wasn't cold feet, wasn't even uncertainty. It was panic. Pure, desperate, animal panic, like a creature caught in a trap. "I can't," he said, so quietly only I could hear. Everything stopped, my heart, my breath, time itself. "What?" I whispered. "I can't do this." His voice was louder now, cracking with emotion. People in the front rows were starting to notice. Heads were turning. Whispers were beginning. Mrs. Liu stopped mid-sentence, confused. "I'm sorry, what? I can't do this," Marcus said again, even louder. His hands released mine. He stepped back away from me, away from the altar. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Emma. I can't. This is a mistake." The room erupted. Not literally. It was more like a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone said, "What's happening?" Someone else said, "Oh my God." I stood there, frozen, literally unable to move. My brain couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. This was a nightmare. I was still asleep in my childhood bed. This was just another bad dream. But it wasn't. Marcus's father stood up from his seat. "Son," he said sharply in Mandarin. "What are you doing?" Marcus ignored him. His eyes were wild now, darting around the room like he was looking for an escape route. "I'm sorry," he said to the crowd, to everyone and no one. "I shouldn't have. I can't. This isn't right." My mother stood up too. "Marcus, honey, you're just nervous. It's okay to be nervous. Why don't we take a moment?" "No!" His voice was almost a shout now. "No, it's not nerves. I can't marry her. I don't—" He stopped himself before finishing that sentence, but the implication hung in the air like poison. "I don't love her." That's what he'd been about to say. In front of 200 people, in front of my parents, my grandmother, my colleagues, he was about to say he didn't love me. "Marcus," I finally found my voice, though it came out weak and broken. "Please, let's just talk about this. We can—" "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time there were tears in his eyes. But not tears of sadness, tears of relief. "I'm so sorry, Emma. You deserve better than this, better than me." And then, and I'll never forget this, never forgive this, he turned and walked down the aisle. Not ran, not stumbled, walked, deliberately, purposefully, through that crowd of shocked, staring faces, through those doors, out of the venue, out of my life. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. I stood there at the altar, alone, in my wedding dress, my bouquet long since dropped to the floor. 200 people staring at me with expressions ranging from pity to horror to, worst of all, curiosity. Like I was a car accident they couldn't look away from. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by someone's strangled sob, my mother, I realized distantly. Mrs. Liu touched my arm gently. "Emma, dear?" But I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything over the rushing in my ears, the pounding of my heart, the horrible, crushing, suffocating weight of humiliation. My legs started to give out. Claire was suddenly beside me, catching me before I fell. "Em, come on. Let's get you out of here. Come on, sweetie." She took my arm and began leading me back down the aisle I'd just walked up as a bride, now walking back as... What? A jilted woman? A fool? The girl who wasn't enough to make someone stay? Every step was agony. Every face we passed burned itself into my memory. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others stared openly, their mouths slightly open. Marcus's grandmother was crying. My own grandmother looked like she might faint. We made it to the back room. Claire shut the door, muffling the chaos that had erupted in the venue. People were standing now, talking loudly, asking questions, consoling Marcus's mortified parents. I sank onto a chair. The dress pooled around me like a deflated dream. I stared at my hands, still wearing the engagement ring, my nails painted the perfect shade of pale pink. Everything was perfect except the marriage that was supposed to happen. "That bastard!" Claire hissed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "That absolute bastard! How dare he? How fucking dare he? I'm so sorry. I'm gonna kill him. I'm literally going to kill him." But I barely heard her. All I could think was he left. He looked at me in my wedding dress, at the altar, in front of everyone I know, and he decided I wasn't worth staying for. I wasn't enough. I had never been enough. The door burst open. Mom rushed in, her face blotchy from crying, Dad right behind her looking shell-shocked. Then Marcus's mother, Mrs. Chen, apologizing profusely in broken English mixed with Mandarin, saying she had no idea that she was so ashamed of her son that this was unforgivable. Then bridesmaids. Then my grandmother. Then friends. Everyone offering comfort, asking if I needed anything, saying how sorry they were. Their pity was almost worse than the abandonment. "Where did he go?" someone asked. "He got in his car," someone else answered. "Jake went after him, but Marcus wouldn't stop. He just drove away." Drove away. Just like that. Left 200 people, a fully catered reception, a string quartet, a 5-tier cake, and the woman he'd promised to marry. The venue manager appeared, uncomfortable, wringing his hands. "I'm so sorry about all this, but what do you want me to do about the reception? The food is already being plated. The bar is set up. The DJ is ready. We have everything prepared for 200 people." The absurdity of the question almost made me laugh. Almost. What did I want to do about the party that was supposed to celebrate my marriage to a man who just publicly rejected me? Claire stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Cancel it. Obviously cancel it. Send everyone home." But Marcus's aunt, a woman I'd met exactly twice, piped up. "The food is already prepared. It would be such a waste. Maybe we should still have some kind of gathering?" People came from so far. "Are you insane?" Claire snapped. "You want to have a party? After what just happened? After your nephew humiliated my sister in front of everyone she knows? I'm just saying the food. I don't give a damn about the food." Their voices rose, arguing, but I couldn't focus on the words. It all sounded like noise, like I was underwater, drowning, and their voices were just muffled sounds from above the surface. I stood up suddenly. My voice came out flat, emotionless, like it belonged to someone else. "Do whatever you want with the food. I don't care. I'm leaving." "Emma, honey," Mom started. "I need to leave, now. Please." Dad understood. "I'll drive you," he said quietly. "Let's go." I walked out through a side door, still in my wedding dress, into the perfect June afternoon. The sun was shining, the sky was cloudless. The weather was exactly as the forecast had promised. 72 degrees and beautiful. Somewhere nearby, birds were singing. Traffic hummed on nearby streets. The world was continuing as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been publicly destroyed, as if the worst moment of my life wasn't etched into the memories of 200 witnesses. Dad's car was parked nearby. He helped me into the passenger seat, gathering the voluminous skirt of my dress, tucking it in carefully. He didn't try to talk, he just drove. We went to the apartment Marcus and I had shared, a one-bedroom in the Hawthorne district with hardwood floors and a view of Mount Hood on clear days. The apartment we'd furnished together, filled with compromises and shared decisions and the accumulated debris of a relationship that had just imploded. Dad helped me inside. "I can stay," he offered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Or your mother can come. Or Claire, you shouldn't be alone right now." "I want to be alone," I said. "Emma, please, Dad. I need to be alone, please." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my face stopped him. He kissed my forehead, whispered, "I love you, sweetheart," and left, reluctantly. The door clicked shut. I stood in the living room of the apartment we'd shared for a year, still wearing my wedding dress, and finally, I let myself feel it. The humiliation, the betrayal. The grief, the rage, all of it crashed over me like a tidal wave. I sank to the floor right there, not making it to the couch or the bedroom. Just collapsed onto the hardwood, my dress spreading around me like a puddle of broken promises. And I cried. Not delicate tears, not quiet sobs, ugly, gasping, choking cries that shook my whole body, wails that came from some primal place I didn't know I had. I cried until my throat was raw, until my face was swollen, until I had no tears left, until I was empty. I must have fallen asleep on the floor because I woke up hours later, stiff and cold. The apartment dark around me. My phone was buzzing somewhere in the folds of my dress. I pulled it out with numb fingers. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, multiple voicemails. Most were from family and friends checking on me. But 5 calls were from Marcus. 5 voicemails. I shouldn't have listened to them. Should have deleted them all without hearing his voice. But some sick part of me needed to know, needed to understand. I pressed play on the first voicemail. "Emma, please pick up. I know you don't want to talk to me. I know what I did is unforgivable, but please let me explain. I panicked. I made a terrible mistake. Please call me back." The second. "Em, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I got scared. Overwhelmed. I love you. Please believe me. I love you. Just let me talk to you." The third. "Where are you? Your mom won't tell me. Claire threatened to castrate me if I came near your family. Emma, please, I need to explain. I need you to understand." I deleted them all. Every single one. And then I blocked his number. But blocking his phone didn't block him from my life. The next day, he came to the apartment. I'd locked the door from the inside, put the chain on. He knocked for 10 minutes straight, calling my name, begging me to let him in. "Emma, I know you're in there. Please." I was scared. I got overwhelmed. The wedding was too big, too much pressure. I panicked. "But I do love you. I do. Please, can we just talk about this?" I sat on the other side of the door, my back against it, listening to him plead. The girl I'd been a week ago would have opened that door, would have let him in, would have listened to his explanations and excuses and apologies, would have told herself that people make mistakes, that love means forgiveness, that second chances are noble and mature. But that girl had died on the altar. In her place was someone I didn't recognize yet, someone harder, someone who'd learned that some betrayals are too big to forgive. "Go away, Marcus," I said quietly through the door. "Emma, go away. Please, let me just explain." "There's nothing to explain. You stood at that altar, looked at me in front of 200 people, and decided I wasn't worth it. That's all the explanation I need." "That's not." "You humiliated me. You destroyed me, in the worst possible way, and now you want me to let you in so you can make yourself feel better about it? No, I won't do that. I won't make this easier for you." There was a long silence. Then I heard something that might have been a sob. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Emma. You deserved so much better than this." "Yes," I said. "I did." I heard his footsteps receding, heard his car start, heard him drive away. And I sat there on the floor on the other side of that locked door and felt absolutely nothing. The crying was done. The pleading was done. Now there was just emptiness. Over the next week, I learned the full truth. Through friends who felt I deserved to know. Through social media posts I shouldn't have looked at but couldn't help checking. Through the merciless grapevine that thrives on gossip and betrayal and other people's pain. Marcus had reconnected with his college girlfriend Stephanie Huang 2 months before our wedding. They'd been messaging on Instagram, meeting for coffee, having long phone conversations that he'd explained away as catching up with an old friend. According to Jake, who felt guilty enough to tell me the truth, Stephanie had never stopped loving Marcus. She'd broken up with him years ago because she wasn't ready for commitment, and she'd regretted it ever since. When she heard through mutual friends that he was getting married, she'd reached out. At first, it was innocent. Or maybe it was never innocent and they were just lying to themselves. Either way, by April, 2 months before our wedding, they were meeting in secret, having long heart-to-hearts about their relationship, about what could have been, about whether they'd made a mistake letting each other go. And on our wedding day, at 2:30 p.m., 30 minutes before our ceremony, Stephanie had sent him a text message. I saw the screenshot later. Someone had leaked it, and it made its way around our friend group. The text read, "If you're not sure, don't do it. I'm still here. I've always been here. I love you, Marcus. I never stopped." He'd read that text in the groom's room while his groomsmen were making last-minute adjustments to their ties. And he'd made his choice. He'd chosen her. Or maybe he'd chosen his own cowardice. Or maybe those were the same thing. Either way, he'd walked out of that venue and driven straight to her apartment in Northwest Portland. They'd been together, officially, publicly, Facebook relationship status together, within a week of our ruined wedding. The humiliation of being left at the altar was compounded by everyone knowing why, everyone seeing, everyone watching the drama unfold on social media, in coffee shop conversations, in the sympathetic looks I got from people I barely knew. "Did you hear what happened to Emma Richardson? Oh my God, can you imagine? Left at the altar for his ex-girlfriend." I would die. I wanted to die, not literally, not quite, but I wanted to disappear, to cease existing, to somehow erase myself from the world so I wouldn't have to face the pity, the gossip, the constant reminder of my own inadequacy. Because that's what it felt like. Not that Marcus was a coward, not that he'd behaved abhorrently, but that I wasn't enough. I wasn't exciting enough, challenging enough, interesting enough to make him stay. I was just the safe choice he'd tried to make until a more appealing option presented itself. I couldn't go anywhere in Portland without the story following me. The coffee shop where Marcus and I used to have Sunday brunch. The barista gave me a pitying look when I walked in alone. The grocery store where we'd shopped together, I ran into his cousin who apologized profusely and awkwardly. My office, colleagues whispered in the kitchen, going silent when I entered. I took a week off work, then 2 weeks, then called my boss. "I need to resign," I said. "Emma, you don't have to make any big decisions right now," she said kindly. "Take all the time you need. Your job will be here." "I can't come back," I said. I can't. Every person I work with knows what happened. I can't face them. I can't be that girl, the one everyone pities." There was a long pause. "If you're sure," she finally said. "I'm sure." I gave my official notice. I broke my lease. Marcus had already moved out, sending his brother to collect his things while I was at my parents' house. I sold most of our furniture on Craigslist. I packed what remained of my life into boxes. Clothes, books, my drafting supplies, a few photographs from a life that now felt like it had belonged to someone else. I said goodbye to my parents over dinner at their house in Eugene. Mom cried. Dad looked angry in a way I'd rarely seen. "You don't have to leave town because of him," Dad said. "Don't let him drive you away from your home." "Portland isn't my home anymore," I said. "It's the place where I was humiliated. Every street corner has a memory. I need to go somewhere that doesn't remind me of him, of us, of who I was." "Where will you go?" Mom asked, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "Seattle," I said. "I have a college friend there, Jen. She said I could stay with her until I figured things out." "You could stay here," Mom offered. "Move back home for a while. We'd love to have you." But moving back to my childhood home would have felt like admitting defeat, like regressing. And some stubborn part of me refused to shrink back into that old life, that old version of Emma who was always in Claire's shadow. "Thank you," I said, "but I need to do this. I need to start over somewhere new." Claire drove down from Portland to say goodbye. We sat in my parents' backyard, drinking wine as the July evening cooled around us. I'm proud of you, Claire said unexpectedly. I looked at her, surprised. For what? For getting publicly humiliated and running away. For choosing yourself, she said. I know it doesn't feel like that right now, but you could have stayed in Portland and tried to tough it out. You could have hidden away and let this define you. Instead, you're starting over. That takes courage. I don't feel courageous, I admitted. I feel broken. Broken things can be mended, Claire said, echoing words a therapist would tell me months later. And sometimes when they're put back together, they're stronger than before. I wanted to believe her. But sitting there in my parents' backyard, my life packed into boxes in my car, I couldn't imagine ever being strong again. I drove north on I-5 the next morning, watching Portland disappear in my rearview mirror. The city that had been my home for 2 years, the place where I'd built my career, where I'd fallen in love, where I'd planned a future that had evaporated like morning fog. Good riddance, I thought bitterly, and then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. Because it wasn't the city's fault. It wasn't even entirely Marcus's fault. Some part of me had known something was wrong and had chosen to ignore it. Some part of me had been complicit in my own destruction. But I couldn't think about that too deeply yet. The wounds were too fresh. So I drove, and I let the miles between me and my old life accumulate, and I told myself that distance would equal healing. It was August now. Summer stretched ahead of me, uncertain and terrifying and somehow full of possibility. Even in my grief, even in my humiliation, I could feel it, the chance to become someone new. My friend Jen lived in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. She'd been in my architecture program at school, one of the few people I'd stayed in touch with after graduation. When I'd called her 3 weeks ago, crying so hard I could barely speak, explaining what had happened, she hadn't hesitated. "Come here," she'd said firmly. "Come to Seattle. Stay as long as you need. We'll figure it out together." Her apartment was small. A 1-bedroom she graciously offered me while she took the couch. "I'm barely home anyway," she'd insisted. "Work keeps me at the office till 8 most nights." Jen worked as a designer for a tech company, creating user interfaces for apps I'd never heard of, but that apparently millions of people used. She was confident, successful, everything I'd once hoped to become. "You'll get there again," she promised me when I arrived, my eyes still red from crying during the 4-hour drive. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you will." For the first few weeks, I barely left Jen's apartment. I slept late, sometimes until noon. I watched mindless television, reality shows and sitcom reruns that required no emotional investment. I scrolled through job listings without applying to any. I existed in a fog of grief and shock, trying to process how my life had fallen apart so completely and so publicly. The apartment had a view of the Space Needle from the living room window. I'd sit there for hours, staring at that iconic structure, thinking about how it had stood there since 1962, weathering earthquakes and storms and decades of change, while I couldn't even weather one failed relationship. Jen would leave for work in the mornings, always checking on me first. "You okay? Need anything? Want me to bring dinner home?" "I'm fine," I'd say automatically. Which was obviously a lie. But what else could I say? I'm fundamentally broken and don't know how to fix myself. She'd look at me with concern, but wouldn't push. Just kiss my forehead and leave, trusting me to take care of myself. But I wasn't taking care of myself. I was eating ice cream for breakfast, wearing the same pajamas for 3 days straight, avoiding phone calls from my parents and Claire, ignoring the world, until one evening, 6 weeks after I'd arrived, when Jen came home and found me crying on the couch, surrounded by empty Ben & Jerry's containers, still in pajamas at 7 p.m. She sat down beside me. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Okay, enough." "What? You've been here 6 weeks, Em. You haven't showered in 3 days. Don't deny it, I can tell. You're eating nothing but sugar and sadness. This isn't grieving anymore. This is giving up." I'm not. Yes, you are. She grabbed my hand, and I get it. What Marcus did was unforgivable. What he did was cruel and cowardly, and you have every right to be devastated. But Emma, you're letting him win. You're letting him destroy you even though he's not here. He's living his life with Stephanie while you're dying in my apartment. The truth of her words hit me like a slap. I don't know how to stop, I whispered. One step at a time, Jen said. Tomorrow you shower, you get dressed in real clothes, and we go for a walk. That's it. Just a walk around the neighborhood. Baby steps. Jen, Emma, I love you. You're my friend, but you're stronger than this. I know you are. I saw you pull all-nighters in college to finish projects. I saw you stand up to that misogynistic professor who said women couldn't be architects. I saw you create beautiful things from nothing. That person is still in there somewhere. So let's find her again. The next day I did what she said. I showered, washing my hair, shaving my legs, all the self-care rituals I'd abandoned. I put on real clothes, jeans and a t-shirt instead of pajamas, and we walked. We walked through Capitol Hill, down Broadway, past the shops and cafes and people living their lives. Past couples holding hands, which hurt. Past families with strollers, which hurt. Past everything that reminded me of the life I'd lost. But somewhere between Jen's apartment and Volunteer Park, I realized I'd stopped thinking about Marcus for an entire 20 minutes. I'd been thinking about the architecture of the buildings we passed, about the urban planning of the neighborhood, about how the streets were designed to encourage walking rather than driving. It was a start. Slowly, painfully, incrementally slowly, I began to rebuild. One small step at a time, like Jen had said. I started applying for jobs, just one application a day at first, then more as I regained some energy. I updated my portfolio, adding projects I'd done in Portland before everything fell apart. I went to coffee shops with my laptop and forced myself to work on new designs to keep my skills sharp. I joined a gym, not because I cared about my body. I was still in that numb place where I barely cared about anything, but because exercise was supposed to help with depression, and I was definitely depressed. I'd run on the treadmill until my legs ached and my lungs burned, and for those 40 minutes, the physical pain would overwhelm the emotional pain. It was a poor substitution, but it was something. I started therapy. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, thank God, though the shared last name made me uncomfortable at first, practiced out of an office in Fremont. She was in her 50s, calm and insightful, with kind eyes and an ability to cut through bullshit that I found both terrifying and comforting. What Marcus did says everything about him and nothing about you, she told me in our third session, after I'd spent the first two just crying. Then why do I feel so worthless? I asked. Because betrayal breaks us, she said simply. That's what it does. When someone we love treats us as disposable, it's natural to internalize that treatment, to believe we are disposable. But that's a lie your grief is telling you, Emma. You're not worthless. He was just incapable of seeing your worth. Then why wasn't I enough? The question that had been haunting me since that June afternoon finally came out. Why wasn't I exciting enough, interesting enough, whatever enough to make him stay? Dr. Chen leaned forward. You were enough. You've always been enough. But Marcus wasn't looking for enough. He was looking for something that doesn't exist. A perfect relationship with no fear, no commitment, no work. And when real love got too real, when the commitment got too close, he panicked and ran to something familiar and comfortable. That's his failure, not yours. It doesn't feel like his failure, I said quietly. It feels like mine. I know, but feelings aren't facts. And here's a fact. You were brave enough to show up, brave enough to commit, brave enough to be vulnerable. Marcus was too cowardly to do any of those things. So who's really the failure here? Those words stayed with me. I wrote them in my journal that night. Feelings aren't facts. It became a mantra. On the hard days, and there were many hard days, I'd repeat it to myself. What I felt was shame, humiliation, worthlessness. But those feelings weren't facts. They were just feelings, and feelings could change. 4 months after arriving in Seattle, I got my first job offer. A small architectural firm in Fremont was looking for a designer. The pay wasn't spectacular, less than I'd been making in Portland, but it was work. It was purpose. It was a reason to get up in the morning beyond just surviving. The interview was at a converted warehouse near the Fremont Troll. I arrived 15 minutes early, my portfolio tucked under my arm, wearing the one professional outfit I'd brought from Portland. My hands were shaking as I pressed the buzzer. Robert Kim answered the door himself. He was in his 60s, a second-generation Korean-American who'd built the firm from nothing 30 years ago. He had warm eyes, salt and pepper hair, and an easy smile that immediately put me at ease. "You must be Emma," he said, shaking my hand. Come in. His office was cluttered with models, blueprints, coffee cups, and books about sustainable architecture. It felt lived in, creative, real. Nothing like the sterile corporate office I'd worked in before. We talked for an hour. He asked about my education, my experience, my design philosophy. I showed him my portfolio, projects from school, the few I'd completed in Portland before everything fell apart. "You have a good eye," he said, studying a design I'd done for a passive solar home. "You see things others miss. The way you've oriented this building to maximize winter sun while minimizing summer heat, that's smart. That's the future of architecture." I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pride. Not in someone else, in myself. "I like your work, Emma," Robert said, closing my portfolio. "But I have to ask, you left your last position pretty abruptly. Can you tell me why?" I'd prepared for this question, but my mouth still went dry. I could lie. Make up something about wanting a change, seeking new opportunities. But something in Robert's kind eyes made me tell the truth. "I was engaged," I said quietly. "My fiancé left me at the altar, in front of 200 people. I couldn't stay in Portland after that. Everywhere reminded me of him, of the humiliation. I needed a fresh start." Robert nodded slowly. "That must have been devastating." "It was," I admitted, "but I'm working through it. I'm in therapy. I'm rebuilding. And I promise, my personal life won't affect my work. If anything, I need the work. It's the one thing that makes me feel like myself." He was quiet for a moment, studying me. Then he smiled. "I appreciate your honesty. And for what it's worth, anyone who'd walk away from someone like you at the altar is an idiot. When can you start?" I almost cried right there in his cluttered office. "Really?" "Really. We're a small team and we could use someone with your skills. Plus, I like people who've been through something and come out the other side. Makes them more empathetic designers. How's Monday?" I started the following Monday. The firm was small, just Robert, 2 other designers, and an office manager named Patricia, who immediately took me under her wing. The work was mostly residential projects, sustainable homes for families who wanted to reduce their environmental impact while still living comfortably. It was exactly what I needed. The projects were meaningful, the team was supportive, and every day I spent designing other people's dream homes, I felt a little more capable of building my own life. Robert became something of a mentor. He'd review my work with a careful eye, offering suggestions without criticism, pushing me to think bigger while respecting my creative vision. "Don't be afraid to take risks," he'd say. "The best architecture challenges expectations." I absorbed everything he taught me, and slowly, incrementally, I got better. Not just at design, but at trusting myself, at believing my ideas had value, at taking up space. By my 6-month mark at the firm, I was leading my own projects. Small ones at first, a home office addition, a bathroom renovation, but projects nonetheless. Clients trusted me, Robert trusted me, and gradually I began to trust myself. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Like you were watching someone else live your story? That's how I'd felt with Marcus. I'd been so busy being the perfect girlfriend, the understanding fiancé, that I'd forgotten to ask what I wanted, what I needed, who I was beyond being someone's partner. In Seattle, alone, I started to find out. I discovered I liked hiking. Jen dragged me on trails around the city. Discovery Park with its views of Puget Sound, Rattlesnake Ledge with its steep climb and panoramic vista, the Burke-Gilman Trail that wound through neighborhoods and forests. I learned that pushing my body, feeling the burn in my muscles, the wind on my face, the satisfaction of reaching a summit, it made me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten. I discovered I liked cooking. Not fancy, complicated meals, but simple, nourishing food. I'd come home from work, put on music, the kind Marcus had always complained was too melancholy, and experiment in my tiny kitchen. Roasted vegetables with herbs, homemade pasta, fresh bread that filled the apartment with the smell of yeast and warmth. Pepper would watch hopefully for scraps, her tail wagging. I discovered I liked being alone, not lonely, alone. There's a profound difference. I could spend an entire weekend by myself, hiking on Saturday, reading on Sunday, and feel full rather than empty. I didn't need constant companionship to feel whole. These were small revelations, but they mattered. Each one was a piece of myself I reclaimed, a part of Emma that had nothing to do with Marcus, with my family, with anyone's expectations but my own. My first year in Seattle passed in a blur of work, therapy, hiking, and gradual healing. The grief didn't disappear. I don't think that kind of grief ever fully disappears, but it became manageable, less sharp, less all-consuming. I got my first big break in month 11. A couple in Ballard wanted to build their dream home, a modern, eco-friendly house with passive solar design, rainwater collection, and a rooftop garden. It was exactly the kind of project I'd always wanted to lead. Robert gave it to me. "You're ready," he said simply. I spent 3 months designing that house. Every detail mattered. The orientation for maximum natural light, the insulation for energy efficiency, the materials chosen for sustainability and beauty. I poured everything I'd learned, everything I'd become, into that design. When I presented the plans to the clients, Tom and Lisa, a young couple expecting their first child, they cried. "This is exactly what we imagined," Lisa said, squeezing my hand. "But better. You understood what we wanted better than we did." That moment, seeing someone moved by something I'd created, healed something in me I didn't know was still broken. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was contributing, creating, mattering. The house took a year to build. I visited the site regularly, working with contractors, solving problems, making adjustments. And when it was finished, when Tom and Lisa moved in with their new baby daughter, they invited the whole firm to a celebration. I stood in the living room I'd designed, with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, the bamboo floors warm underfoot, the passive solar heating keeping the space comfortable without mechanical systems, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride. Not in someone else's accomplishments, in mine. Robert pulled me aside during the party. "You did something special here, Emma. This is the kind of work that changes lives. That house, it's not just beautiful, it's meaningful. That's what great architecture does." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for believing in me, for giving me this chance." "I didn't give you anything," he said kindly. "You earned this. You did the work. Don't forget that." That night, lying in bed with Pepper curled at my feet, I thought about who I'd been 2 years ago. The girl standing at the altar, pleading with her eyes for someone to love her. The girl who'd made herself small, who'd believed her worth was tied to someone else's validation. That girl was gone, and I didn't mourn her anymore. Year 2 in Seattle brought more changes. Robert promoted me to senior designer. My salary increased enough that I could finally move out of Jen's apartment, though we'd become such close friends that leaving felt bittersweet. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," Jen said, helping me move into a 1-bedroom in Greenwood. We're doing Sunday brunch from now on, non-negotiable. We did. Every Sunday, we'd meet at a different cafe, drink too much coffee, and talk about our weeks. Jen dated casually, a string of men who were nice but never quite right. I didn't date at all. You know it's okay to try again, Jen said one Sunday over mimosas. Not everyone is Marcus. I know, I said. I'm just not ready. Maybe I never will be. That's okay too, she said, as long as you're happy. Was I happy? I thought about it. I wasn't ecstatic, wasn't constantly joyful. But I was content, peaceful, comfortable in my own skin in ways I'd never been before. Maybe that was better than happiness. Maybe that was enough. I started mentoring junior designers at the firm, teaching them what Robert had taught me, how to listen to clients, how to balance creativity with practicality, how to see architecture not just as buildings, but as spaces that shape how people live. One of my mentees, a recent graduate named Sarah, reminded me of my younger self. Quiet, talented, uncertain. After reviewing her designs one day, I told her something Dr. Chen had told me. Your ideas are good. Trust them. Don't second-guess yourself into mediocrity. The world needs your voice, not an echo of someone else's. She looked at me with such gratitude. Thank you. I really needed to hear that. Watching her confidence grow over the months made me realize how far I'd come. I was the person I'd needed when I was 25, and somehow that felt like the truest form of healing. Year 3 brought even more growth. I joined a professional organization for women in architecture. I started a blog about sustainable design that gained a small but dedicated following. I spoke at a local conference about passive solar design principles. I was becoming someone, not Marcus's ex-fiancé, not the girl who got left at the altar. Just Emma. Emma, the architect. Emma who had things to say and the confidence to say them. I still saw Dr. Chen monthly. Our sessions had evolved from crisis management to maintenance, then to growth work. You've done remarkable work, Emma, she said in one session. When you first came here, you were shattered. Now look at you. I still have hard days, I admitted. Of course you do. Healing isn't linear, but you've built a life you're proud of. You've learned to value yourself. That's no small thing. Do you think I'll ever trust someone again? I asked. Romantically, I mean. She considered this. I think when you're ready, when the right person comes along, you'll know. You're not avoiding love out of fear anymore. You're choosing yourself. That's different. And when you meet someone who respects that choice, who adds to your life rather than trying to become your life, you'll be ready. I hoped she was right, but I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in my life, I was okay being unpartnered. I was okay being just me. By year 4, I'd become a known quantity in Seattle's sustainable architecture community. I was winning projects on my own merit, getting calls from clients who'd specifically heard about my work. Robert started talking about making me a partner in the firm. You've earned it, he said over lunch one day. You bring in clients, you do excellent work, you mentor the younger designers. This firm is better because of you. I don't know what to say, I managed. Say yes, he grinned. Say you'll stay and help me build this thing into something even bigger. I said yes. Of course I said yes. This firm, this city, this life, they'd saved me. Now I got to be part of building something lasting. That same year, I made a decision that felt momentous. I bought a condo, not a rental, but a place that was truly mine. A top-floor unit in Capitol Hill with a view of Puget Sound, exposed brick walls, and enough space for both living and working. The day I got the keys, I stood on the balcony watching the ferries cross the dark water, and I cried. But this time they were tears of joy, of accomplishment, of arriving somewhere I'd never imagined I'd be. I thought about that day in June, standing at the altar watching my future walk away. I'd been so certain my life was over, that I'd never recover from that humiliation, that betrayal, that public rejection. I'd been wrong. My life hadn't ended that day. A different life had. The life where I was small and accommodating and desperate for someone else's approval. That life needed to die, so this one, this strong, independent, purposeful life, could be born. Year 5, I changed firms. A prestigious Seattle company that specialized in commercial sustainable design had been courting me for months. They offered double my salary, the chance to work on major projects, and a platform to expand my influence in the field. It was hard to leave Robert and the team that had given me my start, but Robert himself encouraged me. "This is your moment, Emma," he said. "You've outgrown us, and that's exactly what's supposed to happen. Go do big things. Make me proud." "You already made me proud of myself," I said, hugging him. "That's a bigger gift than you know." At my new firm, I worked on projects I'd only dreamed about. A net-zero office building for a tech company, a mixed-use development with integrated green space, a retrofit of historic buildings to modern sustainability standards. My work started winning awards. My blog became a column in a professional journal. I was invited to speak at conferences across the country. I traveled to Barcelona to study Gaudi's integration of nature and architecture, to Copenhagen to see how they'd revolutionized bike-friendly urban design, to Tokyo to explore how density and nature could coexist. Each trip expanded my vision, my capabilities, my sense of what was possible. And through it all, I remained single. Not because I was damaged or afraid, but because I genuinely enjoyed my own company. Because my life was full without a partner. Because I'd learned that being alone and being lonely are entirely different things. I dated occasionally. A few coffee dates that went nowhere. One brief relationship with a marine biologist named Kevin that ended amicably after 3 months when we both realized we wanted different things. He wanted someone to build a life with. I was happy with the life I'd already built. "You're not going to settle again, are you?" he said when we ended things. "No," I agreed. "I'm not. I can't." "Good," he said, kissing my forehead. "Don't. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are." I appreciated that, but I also didn't need it. I already knew I was incredible. I'd proven it to myself every day for 5 years. That was enough. Would you have fought back or walked away? I chose neither. I chose to walk forward. To build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. To become someone I actually liked rather than someone I thought others would love. By the time I turned 35, I had everything I'd never known I wanted. A career I was passionate about, work that mattered, respect for my peers, a home with a view, a dog who thought I hung the moon, friends who celebrated me, financial independence, and most importantly, self-respect, self-love, self-sufficiency. I'd become the kind of person I would have admired at 25, the kind of person who knew her worth and wouldn't compromise it for anyone. And then on a cold December afternoon, I got an email that would test everything I'd built, from Marcus Chen. Subject: "Please read this." My hand froze on my mouse. I stared at his name in my inbox. A name I hadn't seen in 10 years. A name I'd worked so hard to stop thinking about, and my heart began to pound. For a moment, I considered deleting it without reading. I'd moved on. I'd built a new life. I didn't need closure from the man who'd shattered my old one. But curiosity, that dangerous human impulse, made me click. "Emma, I know I have no right to contact you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I've thought about you every day for 10 years, and I need you to know the truth. Leaving you at the altar was the worst mistake of my life. Not because Stephanie didn't work out, though she didn't. We divorced 3 years ago. Not because my life fell apart, though it did. I lost my job, my reputation, most of my friends. But because I destroyed the best thing I ever had. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty, courage, respect. Instead, I gave you cowardice and betrayal. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I heard through mutual friends that you're doing well, that you're successful, happy, thriving in Seattle. I'm glad. You deserve every good thing life can offer. If you never want to hear from me again, I understand completely. But if you're willing, I'd like to meet for coffee. Just to apologize in person. To give you closure if you need it. I'm still in Portland, but I could come to Seattle if you'd be willing to see me. Again, I'm so sorry for everything. Marcus. I read the email 3 times. Then I set my phone down and stared out at Puget Sound, watching the December rain create patterns on my window, the ferries crossing the gray water like toys in a bathtub. My first instinct was to ignore it completely, to let those words disappear into the void they deserved. What could Marcus possibly say that I needed to hear? What closure could he offer that I hadn't already given myself? But something Dr. Chen had said years ago came back to me. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you give yourself. But sometimes, facing the past can help us understand how far we've come. I sat with the decision for a week. I talked to Jen over our Sunday brunch. He wants to apologize, she said, her eyes narrowing. After 10 years? What a self-serving piece of... I know, I interrupted. Trust me, I know. But part of me is curious. What does he look like now? How has he changed? Has he changed at all? You don't owe him anything. Not your time, not your forgiveness, nothing. I know that too. But maybe I need to see him, to prove to myself that he doesn't have power over me anymore, that I can look at him and feel nothing. Jen studied me carefully. You're sure you're ready for this? I think so, I said. I'm not the girl he left anymore. I'm not even the same species. And maybe seeing him will help me close that chapter completely. Okay, Jen said finally, but if you need backup, I'm 1 call away, and I've been taking kickboxing classes. I laughed. Noted. I called Dr. Chen for an emergency session. What do you hope to gain from seeing him, she asked. Honestly? I think I want him to see who I became without him because of losing him, but not for him. That's a healthy reason, Dr. Chen said. Just remember, you don't need his validation. You don't need him to acknowledge your growth. You've already proven everything you need to prove, and you proved it to the only person who matters, yourself. I know, but I think I'm ready. I think I can face him without falling apart, without needing anything from him. Then go, she said. Face your past, and then let it go completely. I replied to Marcus's email on a Tuesday evening, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine and pepper at my feet. I'll meet you, once, in Seattle, this Saturday at 2 p.m. There's a cafe called Lighthouse Coffee in Fremont. I'll be there for 30 minutes. If you're late, I'm leaving. This isn't reconciliation. This is me choosing to face my past on my terms. Emma. His response came within an hour. Thank you, I'll be there. I promise I won't be late. Marcus. Which brought me here, to this December afternoon, to this cafe, to Marcus sitting at a table, looking older and smaller and more defeated than I remembered. I walked to the table and sat down without taking off my coat. Power move. I wasn't planning to stay long. Emma, he said again, his voice full of emotion I didn't want to acknowledge. Thank you for coming. You look amazing, truly. I didn't respond to the compliment. You said you wanted to apologize in person, so apologize. He flinched at my directness. The old Emma would have softened that, would have made it easier for him. The new Emma didn't believe in making things easy for people who'd made her life hard. Right, yes. He took a shaky breath. Emma, what I did to you was unforgivable. I was selfish, cowardly, and cruel. I humiliated you in the worst possible way, and I've regretted it every single day since. Why did you do it? I asked. The question I'd carried for 10 years. Why not call it off before? Why wait until we were at the altar in front of everyone? I was a coward, he said simply. I knew for weeks, maybe months, that something was wrong, that I wasn't ready, that I was doing it for the wrong reasons. But I kept telling myself it would be fine, that cold feet were normal, that I'd feel differently once we were married. And then, I prompted, my voice cold. And then Stephanie reached out, And she represented, I don't know, a fantasy, the path not taken. And on our wedding day, standing in that groom's room, I panicked. I got her text, and I ran. I'm not proud of it, I'm ashamed of it, but I did it. You destroyed me, I said quietly, in front of 200 people. You looked at me in my wedding dress and decided I wasn't worth staying for. No, he said urgently. That's not. You were always worth it, Emma. It was me. I wasn't worthy of you. I wasn't brave enough, mature enough, good enough. And now? I asked. What's different now? I grew up, he said. Too late, but I did. Stephanie and I were a disaster. We fought constantly. We had nothing in common except nostalgia and regret. We divorced after 2 years. Since then, I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I sabotaged good things, why I ran from the best relationship I'd ever had. And what did you learn? That I was terrified of commitment, that I equated marriage with losing myself, that I chose excitement over stability, passion over partnership, and that I lost the one person who actually saw me and loved me anyway. I let his words hang in the air. Then I spoke, my voice steady and clear. Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. That girl you left at the altar? She died that day. She had to die, because she was someone who made herself small for the people she loved, someone who ignored her own needs, someone who would have forgiven you even after you destroyed her in front of everyone she knew. Emma, I'm not her anymore, I continued. I'm someone who built a life from nothing, someone who learned to value herself, someone who doesn't need another person to feel complete. And I am grateful, genuinely grateful, that you left me, because if you'd married me, I'd still be that small, scared girl. I'd still be trying to be enough for you instead of being enough for myself. His face crumpled. So there's no chance, no possibility that we could? None, I said firmly, cutting him off before he could finish. I didn't come here to get back together. I came here to prove to myself that you don't have power over me anymore, that I can look at you and feel nothing. And? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Do you feel nothing? I studied him, really looked at him, the man I'd once thought was my future, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no longing, just a mild curiosity about who I'd once thought I loved. Yes, I said, I feel nothing. You're just a person now, a person who hurt me once but can't hurt me anymore. I stood up. I'd been there for 15 minutes, but I'd said everything I needed to say. Wait, Marcus said, standing too. Can I at least know, are you with someone? Are you happy? I looked at him, this man who'd once had the power to destroy me, and smiled. A real smile. Not for him, but for myself. Whether I'm with someone or not isn't your business, I said. But yes, Marcus, I'm happy. Happier than I've ever been. And you had nothing to do with that. In fact, leaving me was probably the greatest gift you ever gave me. You forced me to find myself. So thank you for being too much of a coward to marry me. It was the best thing that never happened. I turned and walked out of the cafe without looking back. The December air hit my face, cold and clarifying. I pulled out my phone and texted Jen, "It's done. I'm free." She responded immediately. "Proud of you? Wine tonight?" "Absolutely." I walked back to my car, past the street where I'd once been so nervous, past the buildings I'd helped design, past the life I'd built brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. And I felt something settle in my chest. Peace. Real, genuine, hard-won peace. That evening, Jen and I sat on my balcony, bundled in blankets against the cold, watching the sun set over Puget Sound. Pepper was curled between us, content. "So, how do you feel?" Jen asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. "Grateful," I said finally. I spent so many years being angry at Marcus for what he took from me, but today I realized he didn't take anything. He set me free. "That's very evolved of you," Jen said, smiling. "Not evolved, just honest. If he'd married me, I'd be trapped in a life that wasn't mine. I'd still be trying to be the person he wanted instead of the person I am. He did me a favor by being honest, even if his timing was spectacularly cruel. "And who are you?" Jen asked. "Right now at 35, who is Emma Richardson?" I smiled. "Still figuring that out, but I like her. I really like her, and that's more than I could say at 25. We clinked our wine glasses and watched the stars emerge over the water. Over the next few weeks, I thought about that meeting less and less. Marcus sent a few follow-up emails, apologizing again, saying he understood, asking if we could be friends. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I'd gotten what I needed from that meeting. Confirmation that I'd moved on. That the past was truly past. That the girl who'd been devastated by his betrayal no longer existed. I focused on my work, on my life, on the future I was still building, brick by brick. In March, 5 months after seeing Marcus, I met someone at an architecture conference in San Francisco. His name was David Chen. The shared last name was a coincidence that made us both laugh. And he was an environmental engineer specializing in sustainable building systems. We met at a panel discussion on net zero buildings. I was speaking. He asked an insightful question from the audience. Afterward, we ended up at the same reception, then the same dinner table, then talking in the hotel bar until 2 a.m. about passive house standards and the future of urban planning. "I really enjoyed talking to you," he said as the bar was closing. "Can I get your number? Maybe we could continue this conversation sometime?" I surprised myself by saying yes. We started texting. Just professional stuff at first, articles we'd found, projects we were working on. Then it became more personal. He told me about growing up in San Diego, about losing his father to cancer, about his passion for making buildings that worked with nature rather than against it. I told him about Seattle, about my work, about Pepper. I didn't tell him about Marcus. Not yet. We had our first real date 2 weeks later. He flew up to Seattle for the weekend, ostensibly to visit a project site, but really to see me. We went to dinner at a small restaurant in Ballard, then walked along the waterfront despite the April rain. "This is going to sound crazy," David said as we stood under an awning, watching the rain create patterns on the water. "But I feel like I've known you forever, like we speak the same language. Buildings and nature and how they intersect," I said, smiling. "More than that, but yes, that too." On our third date, over dinner at my favorite Italian place, David asked the question I'd been dreading. "What's your story, Emma? I know the professional stuff, but what about the personal? What brought you to Seattle? What made you who you are?" I could have lied, could have given him the sanitized version, the story that didn't include humiliation and betrayal and public heartbreak. But something about his kind eyes, his genuine interest, made me want to tell the truth. So I did. All of it. Marcus, the wedding, the altar, the destruction, the rebuilding, everything. He listened without interrupting, his hand finding mine across the table. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. That must have been devastating." "It was," I admitted. "But it also made me who I am, and I actually like who I am now. So in a weird way, I'm grateful for it." "You know what I'm most impressed by?" David said. "Not that you survived it, but that you used it to become someone stronger, that you didn't let it make you bitter or closed off. That takes courage most people don't have." And in that moment, sitting across from this kind, thoughtful man who saw my past not as damage but as growth, I realized something profound. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being hurt, not of being vulnerable, not of trying again, because the worst had already happened. And I'd survived. More than survived, I'd thrived. Whatever came next, I could handle it. Because I knew now, with absolute certainty, that I could handle anything. I'm 35 now. I have a career I love, doing work that matters. I have a home that's mine, with a view that still takes my breath away. I have friends who celebrate me, who've watched me rebuild and cheered every step. I have a dog who thinks I hung the moon, and I have the slow, exciting, terrifying beginning of something new with David. We're taking it slow, both of us aware that good things shouldn't be rushed, But there's something there, something real and adult and based on who we actually are rather than who we hope the other person will be. The story of the girl who was left at the altar isn't my whole story anymore. It's just one chapter. A painful, transformative chapter that taught me who I am and what I'm capable of surviving. Marcus gave me the worst day of my life, but that worst day led to the best decade of my life. If I could go back, if I could somehow prevent him from leaving, from humiliating me, from breaking my heart in front of 200 witnesses, I wouldn't. Because that broken-hearted girl needed to shatter so the woman I became could emerge from the pieces. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to the most profound transformations. Sometimes being left behind is actually being set free. Sometimes the person who destroys your old life is unknowingly giving you permission to build a new one. I thought Marcus leaving was my ending. I thought standing at that altar, watching him walk away, was the worst moment of my life. But it was actually my beginning. The beginning of learning to love myself. The beginning of building a life that was truly mine. The beginning of becoming someone I'm proud to be. And what a beautiful beginning it turned out to be. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, know this. Their betrayal says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. You are not defined by who left you. You are defined by how you rebuild. What would you do in my place? Have you ever turned your greatest pain into your greatest strength? Have you experienced favoritism in your family or felt invisible in a relationship? How did you find your way back to yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.